Pseudo Legendaries are one of the coolest groups of Pokemon out there, but what if there was a Pseudo Legendary of every single type? That's what we're going to look at in this video, as I'm going to show you what a Pseudo Legendary of every type that hasn't been covered by a Pseudo yet could look like. As of right now, 10 of the 18 types have been used by Pseudo Legendaries at one point or another, and those types are Dragon, Flying, Rock, Dark, Steel, Psychic, Ground, Fighting, Ghost, and Ice. That means there are 8 types that we have never seen in a Pseudo Legendary form. Until now, that is. Those types are Normal, Fairy, Fire, Grass, Electric, Poison, Bug, and Water, and we are going to be giving them all a Pseudo Legendary design, with the help of my good friend Rgreywind, who I have commissioned for the artwork of these designs in this video, and who you can check out in the description. With that said, it just so happens that all 3 of the starter types are included in this bunch, so why don't we go ahead and start with them. Starting with the Grass type, I would like you to meet Rgreywind, a Grass Dragon Brachiosaurus Pokemon. As a Pseudo Legendary, the Dragon type is naturally going to be incorporated a decent amount of the time, basically by default, but also not always, so stay tuned for that. And when thinking of what could be a dragon, a dinosaur pretty naturally came to my mind. Then, when I had the thought of what could be a Grass Dragon type in particular, I thought of long neck dinosaurs, as they are pretty famously known for being herbivores. I then had the thought of the super long neck and tail of a Brachiosaurus, and how they actually have a very similar shape to that of a vine. I thought that these 2 inspirations blended together really well, so that is the concept behind Rgreywind and what it is meant to be, a vine dinosaur. The leaves that are attached to its body are also not only meant to be leaves to go along with the vine theme, but are also meant to imitate sails, as some dinosaurs are known to have had them. I specifically wanted these to look like ginkgo leaves as well, since they are thought to be one of the main things that Brachiosauruses ate, and they also have a very distinctive and pretty look to them, especially when they're all yellow in the fall, and I thought that would look great on a Pokemon. This Pokemon's name, meanwhile, is pretty straightforward, just coming from sauropod, which is the kind of dinosaur that the Brachiosaurus is, combined with vine. But despite its simplicity, I think it works pretty well, and overall, this one is one of my favorites of this bunch. We've got a lot more to cover though, so let's go ahead and move on to the Fire type. And as we do that, I also wanted to mention really quick that a sale is going on right now on my merch store. Right now, for a limited time, you can get 10% off either a Rgreywind plush or the Fulkachi plush that comes with a special promo card. All you gotta do is use code BFCM at checkout to get the discount, so it's a great time to pick something up if you've been on the fence. These plushies are awesome, they're super soft and squishy, they're really high quality, they go perfectly with any gamer merch setup. The limited Fulkachi card is really cool too, and every order helps out the channel tremendously to keep making content. The sale is only for a limited time though, so be sure to use the link in the description to hop on it, and thanks a ton to everyone who's grabbed something. And now, let's go ahead and get back to the pseudos. This is Malgalore, and this is what I meant when I mentioned that not all of these pseudos were going to be dragon types. In fact, I actually killed 2 birds with 1 stone here, because Malgalore is Fire Fairy type, which are 2 of the types that are currently unused by Pseudo Legendaries. I opted for this because Fire Fairy is also currently an unused type combination, which I feel makes it all the cooler to use, and personally, it's probably one of, if not the unused type combination that I want to see happen the most at this point. So all in all, I felt like that made for good Pseudo Legendary material. A little more specifically though, the typing of this Pokemon comes from the fact that it is based on a Chimera, which are some of the most iconic mythological creatures, which accounts for the Fairy type. And then the Fire type comes from the Chimera's ability to breathe fire. The other thing about chimeras, of course, is that their bodies have traits of multiple different animals, which is honestly what a lot of Pokemon designs are anyways, so this just made perfect sense to me as a design. The head and body are meant to be like a lion, and the tail like a snake, just like a normal chimera. But then, the front legs were meant to be a little more dragon claw-like, and for good measure, it also has a fish-like fin on its back. Additionally, these features were also meant to vaguely resemble actual Pokemon too, like the tail resembling Seviper, the front legs were meant to be reminiscent of Druddigon, and the fin pulls from that of Gyarados. The snout and mouth even have just a titch of Entei to them, who is also lion-like itself, and overall, using these kind of vague similarities to other actual Pokemon, and not just animals, I felt like was a really cool way to make this Pokemon all the more interesting. Finally, the name Malgalore is pretty cool sounding in my opinion, so it's pretty fitting for this design, and it's also pretty fitting for what this Pokemon is, as it comes from amalgamation, which is the combining of multiple different things, which is exactly what a chimera is, and then it also comes from lore, referencing the mythology origins of the chimera, and also this Pokemon's fairy typing. We are now going to go ahead and transition though to the water type. So I would like to introduce to you Maydroqua. Water was another type that I thought would pair well with the classic dragon typing of Pseudo Legendaries, so this Pokemon is a water dragon type. As you can see, it's very sea serpent-like, but it's not just that, as it is also based around mermaids. If I were to give this Pokemon a whole evolutionary line, you would actually be able to see this a little bit better as well, because I also imagined this Pokemon having a first stage that I unfortunately wasn't able to get artwork done of, but I imagined it as a little clam Pokemon that was a pure water type, and then the concept of this line would basically be that of a mermaid in its final evolution bursting out of a clamshell in its first stage, which is a thing that you see with mermaids sometimes. So it would kind of have that Pupitar, Shelgon type of vibe in its pre-evolutions, and then you would get a big payoff with Maydroqua. The name Maydroqua also incorporates mermaids as well, as it comes literally from mermaid as well as dragon and aqua. It is honestly kinda crazy that we haven't seen any of the starter types get a Pseudo Legendary yet, but personally, I feel like these designs show the extreme potential that they could have, and why they should definitely happen at some point. And while it's not exactly a starter type, Electric is pretty close to being kind of like an honorary starter type thanks to Pikachu. So let's go ahead and look at it next. This is Fire Rage, and I kind of cheated on this one to be honest, because it is a Fire Electric type. So I reused Fire along with Electric, but it's for a good reason. Number one, this is a very cool type combo that I thought was Pseudo Legendary worthy. Two, it is also a very rare type combo that is currently only being used by Rotom Heat. And number three, I also came up with a concept that I feel like works pretty well for both the typing and a Pseudo Legendary, as Fire Rage is based on the Tasmanian Devil. This was another chance to do a non-dragon pseudo, and I thought it worked well since Tasmanian Devils are known to be angry and aggressive, so it's something that could be pretty powerful. It's also what explains the typing, as that anger and aggression is the main theme of this Pokemon. It would start out as a pure fire type, with fire representing its fiery rage, and then once it evolves into Fire Rage, it also gains the electric type too, as it becomes even more angry, and the electric type obviously represents electricity, and electricity is often representative of big scary thunderstorms, which can also kind of be symbolic of anger itself. So while I may have cheated a little bit with the typing on this one, I feel like it came together pretty well, which is why this one is another one of my favorites from this group. Meanwhile, the name Fire Rage is pretty self-explanatory because it just comes from fiery and rage, but then it also includes the word ire, at least phonetically speaking, which essentially means to be angry at someone or something, which also obviously fits really well too. So yeah, there is your electric Pseudo Legendary, and now let's go ahead and do normal next, because how the heck would a normal type Pokemon be a Pseudo Legendary? Those two ideas are practically opposites of each other. Well, if it did ever happen, maybe it would look something like this. This is Rgreywind, and it is how I envision you might be able to pull off a normal type Pseudo Legendary. First, like some of the other designs, I wanted to use a rare or unused type combination for this Pokemon, to give it the rarer feel of a Pseudo Legendary, which is also a little more needed in this case due to it being a normal type Pokemon. So I made Rgreywind into a normal Steel type, which is currently an unused type combo. I also knew that I wanted this design to be kinda like one of those ambiguous monster-like Pokemon designs, like Exploud or Snorlax, where it's kinda just more of a monster type of creature and doesn't really look too much like a specific animal or real-world thing, I guess you could say. I felt like this also helped it out as a normal type to feel all the more rare and interesting like you want a Pseudo Legendary to be, and then as far as how I planned to try and make the Steel type work, I ultimately decided to resort to puns and base this Pokemon on heavy metal music. Yeah, you see what I did there? I know, just totally genius. While there are admittedly other music-based Pokemon out there like this, I honestly thought this would be as good of a way as any to portray this type in a little more of a fun way, and so that's why Rgreywind is looking a little grungy and like a rock star. That grunge is also where Rgreywijnd's name comes from, along with the word gallium, which is a type of metal that is also considered to be a heavy metal. So yeah, the puns are very strong with this one. Now we're going to look at the Poison type though, and Poison is another type that I decided to pair with Dragon because that sounded pretty cool, and when I thought of the Poison Dragon type, it immediately gave me this vibe of classic fairy tales, and brought to mind things like Sleeping Beauty and the Poison Apple from Snow White, so I decided to use that to create a more fairy tale feeling Pseudo Legendary. This is Lethal, and you can pretty much tell right away that it has that kind of classic fairy tale vibe. My favorite part about this design though, which I think is pretty cool, is its tail, because as you can see, it's got what's meant to look like an apple on its tail, representing the poison apple from Snow White. But it's not just any apple, because it's made to look like Applin's apple. So basically, what I imagine this Pokemon would do is use its tail as a way to bait other Pokemon in, much like the witch does with the apple in Snow White, and then this Pokemon would take out its prey whenever it got too close to its tail. The tail on this Pokemon also intentionally curls up and around to make the apple part of its tail look as if it is hanging from a tree, which I thought was a pretty cool way to portray the whole apple part of this Pokemon's concept. And then, speaking of tails, its name, Lethal, works pretty nicely too, as it obviously comes from tail and lethal for obvious reasons, but then it is spelled like fairy tale, for a nice double entendre that helps to cover all of the inspirations of this Pokemon in a very nice, neat, and seamless kind of way. However, we are now going to move on because we've got to cover the Bug type next, and a Bug type Pseudo Legendary is a super intriguing idea because Bug types are typically pretty weak, which obviously isn't the case with Pseudo Legendaries. On top of that, there's also only one way that I think a Bug type Pseudo Legendary should be, and that is as a Bug Dragon type. Because not only is that a cool idea, but it's obviously the most infamous unused type combo that is out there that people have wanted to see forever, and a Pseudo Legendary, in my opinion, would be the perfect way to finally make that happen after all this time. So with that said, this is Dragomoth. This Pokemon has a rather unique inspiration as it is based on the spotted Apatalodes species of moth, and I also probably mispronounced that terribly. This moth is also sometimes referred to as a dragon moth because its body, when looked at from behind, actually looks like a little mini dragon. So I decided to use this as a reasoning for the dragon type on this bug Pokemon by basing it on this moth in reverse, where the back end of its body is now the front, and therefore it is using the dragon-like appearance of this moth instead of just the normal front-facing moth. I thought that this made for a fun twist that a good Pokemon design could be based around, and I think that ended up being the case because this is one of my favorites out of this bunch as well. Its name is also about as simple as it gets because it literally just comes from dragon and moth, but I thought that it had such a cool sound to it that I decided to just go for it anyway, and sometimes with Pokemon names, that's really all you need. And that is what it might look like if there was a Pseudo Legendary Pokemon of every single type. Be sure to let me know your favorites in the comments, and leave a like and subscribe for more. I'll see you soon with another new video, and until then, as always, thanks so much for watching, I really appreciate it, and I will smell you guys later.